In the division of peregrine duties is the female who assumes the balance of tasks associated with the nest. Males, who are smaller and less devoted defenders, do most of the hunting. It is a practical and proven arrangement, and yet she was a tundra peregrine, a bird whose concept of distance is defined by the horizon, and whose migrations vault hemispheres, a bird whose very name, Falco peregrinus, means wanderer. She had incubated her clutch for 20 days, would for 12 to 14 more, and she was restless and perhaps in some vague fashion envious of a mate who used his morning and evening hunts to exercise and wander, leaving her to tend and defend. Only her eyes were free to roam, leaving her to tend and defend. Only her eyes were free to roam, and these she turned upon her world, upon the river swollen with snowmelt, upon the opposing cliff face, the distant snow-capped peaks of the Brooks Range, and the thunderstorms that raced across the rolling tundra of Alaska's North Slope, touching the lives of creatures 10, 20, 50 miles away. She could not see these creatures. Even the eyes of a peregrine have their limits, but from the ledge she could easily observe more immediate neighbors. These included hovering jaegers and towering longspurs, nesting glaucous-winged gulls and grazing caribou. Across the river and a mile down, she could see the female gyre-falcon tending her young on the lichen-stained ledge that was the pair's traditional stronghold, and half a mile away, on her side of the river, she observed the raven kids cutting up around their abundantly whitewashed nest. But these were not merely neighbors, they were rivals who earned the special scrutiny that goes with such a distinction. As odd as it might seem for a falcon to nest in proximity to other predators, the peregrine's closest neighbor would arouse greater curiosity. Below the peregrine, less than a stone's toss away, was the huddled form of a Canada goose. Beneath the goose was her clutch of 5 eggs. If the peregrine seemed like stone, the goose seemed like part of the cliff itself. So quietly did she lie, and so closely did she resemble the shale pile around her. But the bird's quiescence was not due to any fear of the falcon. Indeed, the goose had selected this site for her nest to take advantage of the falcon's defensive umbrella, and the curious, benign indifference peregrines seem to bestow upon birds nesting close to their nest sites, even birds that peregrines call prey. Nest defense was a factor governing the falcon's choice of sites. 2. Although in some parts of the world peregrines will lay their nest in open tree cavities or pre-built nests, they are for the most part cliff nesting birds, a strategy to foil 4-legged predators and some 2-legged ones. The ideal site is a ledge no less than 2 feet wide that overlooks and is protected by water below. The ledge should be high enough to deter predators who might climb, and low enough to foil advances from above. An overhang above the nest is a bonus, both for deflecting hungry eyes and for sheltering birds from the elements. Here's the cliff, here's an overhang. See, they're under it. On the ledge here, there's a ledge, and they have a roof over their head. Pretty beautiful, incredible, huh? Where am I? Though serviceable, the site occupied by the female peregrine was not ideal. The cliff was sloped, not vertical, and therefore not unassailable. A determined, sure-footed predator could find ways of reaching the nest ledge from above. Nor did the ledge offer much more than meager protection from the elements. In fact, it was quite open above. The nest sites of choice were the ones occupied by the ravens and the gyrfalcons. Both were large, roomy enclaves cut deep into the face of the cliff. Both offered a southern exposure for greater warmth and comfort. And the rock face above and below was sheer, affording maximum protection. The only way to reach either side was to fly. The ledge occupied by the ravens would have been the peregrine's first choice, had in fact been the ledge that she and her mate had occupied the previous year, but ravens are permanent residents in the Arctic, and their prize for enduring winter hardships is first choice of nest sites. When the peregrines had returned from their winter quarters during the first week of May, they flew down south for the winter. Now they're coming back in May. They found ravens already on eggs, and for some strange reason they don't attack them. If they're having eggs, having babies. After 2 days of open hostilities, the falcons relocated to their present site, adopting the nest built by a rough-legged hawk the previous year. Hawks, all right. Peregrines, like other falcons, do not build their own nests. They lay their eggs in rocky scrapes or appropriate strategic nests. Indeed, it has been suggested that peregrines and rough-legged hawks may have a commensal relation, much as gyrfalcons and ravens do. That in the Arctic, peregrines may depend upon rough-legged hawks to build and periodically maintain nests. Whatever the truth, it is plain that in the game of musical ledges, early nesting species such as the raven and the gyrfalcon are the winners. Rough-legged hawks who arrive while gyrfalcons are already incubating legs run third. Peregrines who do not reach the Arctic until May must settle for, or more appropriately resettle, among the various ledges traded and occupied along the bend. The one now occupied by the peregrines was the least favored. The male rough-legged, whose nest was around the bend upriver, called ee. It was a breathy call with a peevish, what's a great word, whiny quality, and frequently given. As a species, rough-leggeds are more sensitive to intrusion than peregrines, venting their displeasure by calling and taking wing even when potential predators are far from the nest. But the peregrine's rough-legged neighbors were touchy even by rough-legged standards, though the peregrine could not see the buteos from her ledge. She could tell that the male had taken to the air and that he was agitated about something. What she could not tell was what. What she needed was her mate. Naya, she called. It was a wild call, a no-nonsense call, and although there was something about it that was plaintive, the call had another, harsher quality that cut like flint. The cry was not uttered with vehemence or volume, yet the sound of it carried, eliciting chortles from the raven kids and engendering stillness that was utter in the goose. What the cry did not return was an echo from the peregrine's mate. Abruptly, the female peregrine rose from the pile of sticks, stepped away from the precious contents, and launched herself over the river, on wings that rippled like water over stone. She swung away from the cliff, gaining elevation and the vantage she needed. Half a mile upstream on a ledge, just about 6 foot seam of coal, a pale head of the female rough-legged showed above her nest. The bird was vigilant but immobile. Her mate was circling above the cliff, but he was not calling now, and short of climbing to his height, the female peregrine had no way of telling what had disturbed him and whether it had any bearing on her nest. Of her own mate there was still no sign. The temptation was strong to mount the skies, to satisfy her curiosity and unleash her wanderlust. But her obligation to the nest was stronger. She returned to the ledge, unfurling feet that were shockingly large, and landed. They could kill by constriction, these celebrated feet. They could kill with an open-fisted blow delivered with thunderbolt speed. Though not as large or as powerful as the feet of a golden eagle, they were more universally feared. Peregrine falcons are nearly cosmopolitan in their distribution, nesting on every continent but Antarctica. Nothing that falls between the sides of a long spur and an eagle and flies in open country is beyond the reach of those talons. No creature, whatever its size, encroaches upon a peregrine's nest site with impunity. They'll climb up and then come down 200 miles an hour with their talons like that out. Isn't that amazing? The reason lay at her feet. 4 eggs, nearly as large as hen's eggs, but more oval and ornate. In shape, they describe the elliptic orbit of a planet. In color, they were cream-based, but so liberally spattered with burnt reds and browns that these overlying colors coalesced and eclipsed it. They had the luster of polished stone, the texture of a lover's touch, and a warm glow that recalled life itself. In a word, they were beautiful, among the most beautiful eggs in the world of birds. They begged a hand to reach out and enfold them, and many a hand could not resist that temptation. In the acquisitive Victorian era, peregrine eggs were a favorite among egg collectors who plundered nests. In England, where egg collecting was particularly popular, the detrimental practice continued into the 20th century, only to be eclipsed by a more insidious and widespread threat to peregrine populations. DDT, the chemical agent, introduced in the 1940s to control insect pests, had an unanticipated side effect. It inhibited a female peregrine's ability to transport and redistribute calcium, the principal component of eggshells. The result was eggs that were 15 to 20% thinner shelled than shell tolerances engineered by nature. They cracked open. The birds died. See? The poisoned eggs were still beautiful, but they were also dysfunctional, breaking beneath the weight of incubating birds. So when the birds sat on them to incubate, it would break the shell because of this damn DDT. Breaking the weight of incubating birds, causing widespread reproductive failure in peregrine populations over most of Europe, Asia, and North America. By 1970, Arctic peregrine populations had been trimmed to between 1/4 and 1/3 of historical numbers. One subspecies, the one that occupied North America east of the Mississippi, called the eastern anatum, was extirpated. In North America, only the Pili, a large dark race localized to islands and archipelagos off the coast of Alaska and British Columbia, passed through the DDT era relatively unscathed. Though many raptor species felt the effects of DDT, it was the demise of the peregrine falcon that won broad public sympathy and became an environmental flashpoint. The evidence and the outcry was enough to put an end to the widespread use of DDT. Declining populations stabilized and began to rebound. Over the course of 2 decades, as the residue and the effects of DDT disappeared, peregrine populations over most of North America returned to historical norms, and the eggs whose fame was once founded in their beauty assumed a new poignancy. They became symbols of the unmindful hardships our species levels against the environment. Do you like this? But the bird staring down at her clutch of eggs. How about that word clutch? Knew none of this. Her affinity for her eggs had nothing to do with their aesthetic value or environmental ethics. It had to do with the instincts of a parent, and they were absolute. With a degree of care that some might feel was at odds with nature, with a degree of care that some might feel was at odds with the nature ascribed to one of the Earth's most celebrated predators, the falcon reached into the nest with an open bill, carefully turning the eggs to reapportion her body's warmth. Toes closed, feet limp, she shuffled carefully into position above her clutch. Then, spreading her feathers, she settled, pressing the bare warmth of her incubation patches over the oval vessels and folding all in a blanket of feathers. The bird was hardly settled before a cannonade of stones cascaded down the slope, falling all around her. Her departure this time was neither careful nor leisurely, and had the eggs not been cradled in a nest, it is possible that two would have been thrown. But caution came second to need, and even before the bird turned to confront whatever creature dared threaten the sanctity of her eggs, she was venting her anger and screaming her intent. Naya, Naya! The sound sent shock waves across the tundra and echoed from the cliffs. It brought every head within earshot to bear upon the ledge, and not a few creatures, great and small, changed their plans and adjusted their paths so as not to draw the misdirected heat of the female peregrine in her rage. Do you like this? Even the wolverine, picking a path down the cliff, was not unmoved. But anger in another creature only seems to fuel the ferocity that burns in these Arctic predators. Even grizzly bears give ground to these large, ill-tempered members of the weasel clan. And nothing that lives in the Arctic and whose existence is tangential to the earth can claim immunity from the creature's marauding, not even peregrines. Look at it, it's going to go up, rob the nest. Wow, what a photograph, huh? Drawing. Are you ready for this? Okay, where am I? All right, here we go. The wolverine was not even trying to be circumspect. It knew where the falcon's nest was. It wanted the eggs, and it had fairly calculated their price. When the bird stopped calling, the wolverine tensed but did not retreat. So much has been written about peregrines and their prowess that truth would seem fancy's victim. But just the opposite seems true. Peregrines are fast, so fast that in this age of precision measurement, their maximum speed is still conjectural, so fast that whether the blow delivered by a diving falcon is dealt with an open or closed fist remains a matter of debate. They go so fast no one can really see, you know? All right. In level flight, a peregrine cruises at 40 to 55 miles per hour. And when hunting with wings beating 4.4 beats per second, a peregrine can attain speeds of 70 miles per hour. It's fast as a sprinting cheetah, nearly fast enough to catch a racing pigeon or fleeing canvasback duck. But it is when peregrines place themselves at odds with the horizon, wedding the power of their wings to the Earth's gravitational pull, that speeds are attained that fairly exceed the sum of their parts. A German researcher, E. Hangda, clocked the Wonder Falcons at 170 miles per hour in a dive angled at 30 degrees and 220 miles per hour at angles measuring 45 degrees. Can you believe that? Can you imagine getting hit with one of them? With one of those talons, you know, 2 talons? Yeah. In 1975, an English researcher, D.A. Orton, used mathematical estimates pertaining to the speed of free-falling objects to calculate that a peregrine in a vertical drop of 5,000 feet would be able to attain a maximum velocity of 230 to 240 miles per hour. But this is the king of birds, right? Right, the queen of birds. Mathematical ceilings notwithstanding, analysis of film footage taken of a stooping peregrine during World War II led researchers at the Naval Research Laboratory in England to the startling conclusion that the feathered missile was traveling at 275 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour faster than Orton's projected ceiling. And astonishing as this figure is, it pales next to the touted but unverifiable estimate made by a fighter pilot in 1930. While diving on a flock of ducks for practice, the pilot was startled to see a peregrine pass him at a speed that he judged to be twice his plane's airspeed of 173 miles per hour. The enraged female peregrine was not traveling at 350 miles per hour as she stooped on the Wolverine. She wasn't going that fast, but she dove on the Wolverine to protect her nest. Listen, she was not traveling at 275 or 240 or even 170 miles per hour. There was no time to tower up above her adversary so she could dive down, with momentum, because she had to save the chicks immediately, you know what I mean? There was no time to tower up above her adversary to add the advantage of gravity's lever to her plunge. When she fell, she had less than 200 vertical feet to apply to her rage, to get momentum, enough to propel her 1,200 grams to a speed just shy of 80 miles per hour. Much of this force she transferred to her feet just before she struck, raking the weasel's back, the peregrine, the Wolverine's back, with an open-taloned hind claw. The animal buckled, snarled, and turned, confronting empty air. It lost its footing and skidded down the slope, tumbling into a stand of stunted willows that checked its fall and saved it from another punishing blow. All that touched it of the peregrine's second stoop was a rush of air. Nia, Nia, the bird called as she climbed and fell silent as she stooped. Stoop means plunge. She cried more loudly when the animal moved and softly when the Wolverine paused to consider its route. Using the scant vegetation to its best advantage, the marauder continued down the slope past the nest ledge, taking paths that avoided open areas so she wouldn't get raked again. He wouldn't. It was not afraid of the peregrine, but it had felt the bird's talons and was respectful. The Wolverine stopped its descent and began working across the ridge just below the nest ledge, moving from boulders to bushes like an infantryman dodging fire. The peregrine, moving like a possessed pendulum, continued her barrage and her harangue. But for all her anger and for all her skill, she could not dislodge the creature. Had the male peregrine been present, the defense would have been formidable, maybe even daunting enough to deter a Wolverine. But the male was not present, and the contest would have ended badly. Should have ended badly for the peregrine, but for one thing, chance. One of the most determining principles in the universe. The goose who would be stoned did not smell like stone, and when approached too closely did not act like stone. The goose held her ground until the Wolverine was barely 10 feet away, then flushed, leaving her eggs to the predator, who quickly opted to accept easy fortune in place of hard potentials. Besides, goose eggs are larger than peregrine eggs and more numerous. Though the Wolverine's ambition was redirected, the peregrine's anger was not. The bird continued to harass the Wolverine, forcing the mammal to take the eggs one at a time to a protective stand of willows in order to consume them. When the animal finally fled, the last egg cradled in its mouth, the peregrine harassed it all the way to the top of the cliff and onto open tundra beyond. Only when she was certain that the animal was not coming back did she return to the ledge. Did you like this? Swinging wide over the river, the bird lit upon the ledge but did not settle upon the eggs, not immediately, and the reason lay at her feet. Chance is fickle. It gives and takes, and although it saved the peregrine's nest from the wolverine, it did so at a price. The peregrine studied the dislodged rock that chance had directed into the old rough-legged nest, but it took several minutes for her to understand that the 2 eggs she had dislodged upon departure were all that was left of her clutch. The other 2 lay beneath the stone. "Naya," she cried, but the hard edge of it was blunted by what may have been puzzlement, but what sounded like loss. Maneuvering the surviving eggs with an open bill, she tried to compose herself over them in the usual way, but discovered that the stone prevented this. After several futile efforts, she turned 90 degrees, and by facing the cliff, she found that she could mantle the eggs by crowding the rock. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't ideal, but it was workable. She was on the eggs only a short time when her mate returned, a partially eaten golden plover in his talons. He circled in front of the nest, inviting the female to take the meal, and when she did not, he flew to an outcropping where he deposited the morsel before flying to the sentinel perch he favored. Is that a story or what?
Yeah.
Isn't this a great book?
It is. What is that? The Windmasters? Pete Dunne.
I wonder if he's written anything else.